one to rest on his laurels. He has still been keeping very active. I know for a fact that he's done some teaching over there at NC State. He's also traveled with a world-renowned Jackson member of the Jackson family and everything, doing some traveling with him around, I believe, the African continent, if not some other parts of the world. And, of course, he is always bringing out a lot of truth and things of that nature. I'm hoping that he'll tell us a little bit about the book that he published sometime back that folks are still quoting to this day. And I'm sure he's got some observations about both Durham politics as well as the politics of the nation, because Dr. Bridges is always keeping his eye on what is going on in the world. He was doing that back in the 90s and the 2000s, and I'm still thinking he's still doing it to this day.
Wow.
Bruce.
Nice.
I'm right here.
So, Bruce, tell folks what you've been up to lately. A lot of folks are listening that have probably
This is on
not
podcast.
heard from you.
This is on podcast, Mark. That was a hell of an introduction, so I can say it like that on podcast, can I?
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you know, Mark. I'm really glad to be with you and your program, and I like the fact it's very clear. You know, no problems in the background and no loud noises, and I like it. It sounds almost like commercial radio, really. And and you mentioned some things, and if I were to go back to my and give you a little bit of my odyssey, I call it. You know, I really became very active in the civil rights movement in Durham, North Carolina, from a very early age, at about 14 or 15 years old, when I met Howard Fuller. And you're familiar with him, and your father worked for Howard Fuller, with Howard Fuller. Jim Lee took over the Foundation for Community Development after Howard Fuller left. And I worked in the program with Benjamin Ruffin, UOCI, which was a United Organization for Community Improvement, with Ann Atwater and Constance Chalmers and various people. And Andy Ballantyne and Nathaniel Ballantyne. And we boycotted stores downtown when I leave Durham High School, the racist white high school in Durham, North Carolina, which is now called Durham School of the Arts. I would leave Durham High School, as it was called then, and go downtown and run upstairs to an office next door to Rose's 5 and 10 cent store and get my flyers that had the listing of the names of stores that black Durhamites were not supposed to shop in. And I would go stand in front of maybe Tom McCann's or Silver's or Cress's and passing out those flyers and tell the black folk, don't shop where you're not being hired. Don't spend your money where you're not being respected. Don't support those who don't support you. So I started off with that sojourn, Mark, at a very early age here in Durham, North Carolina, right out on the streets. Then one day I ran into a Muslim brother with a newspaper and a bow tie and a suit, and he starts inviting me to come to the mosque. So it's just a long story, but I'm glad you have a little time and don't mind me talking about that, you know.
No, not at all. And I'm sure that as I'm thinking about it, some of these things that you're seeing in the news now here in Durham probably remind you of what was going on when you were a youth and when you were doing some of that fight. Because I'm hearing, you know, we've got this thing going on between Heidi Carter and Mr. Davis and some of the other stuff that's going on, like even what happened with in the Latin community with Miss Balladares and things of that nature. So I'm sure that you've seen some of these
and
things.
also with the big national news too, with my old home place in Durham, MacDougall Terrace. I grew up born and raised in MacDougall Terrace, and you know they're all over the news. You know that though.
Yes, I do know that. All over the news. We talked about it to a couple of our past guests and everything because it's all over the news. And actually, I was talking to a young brother that's living there now, moved there from Harlem. And he was talking about how he doesn't understand how they've got all this money to do all this redevelopment and give all this housing, in the millions of dollars of categories, probably hundreds of millions, but they can't afford to get these people their housing or give them some better housing. I think that he said he had been placed first in a hotel, and this is a whole family because he's got, I believe, 3 kids, and it's him and his lady. And then now they've got moved him from MacDougall to Cornwallis. So they just moved him from the pot into the frying pan.
I didn't know they moved from. I know they moved them from McDougal into the Millennium Hotel, into another hotel out on Highway 55. But I didn't know about from McDougal to Cornwallis. But I guess it could be true, and but that's a part of the history of Durham, North Carolina. And when you look at it too, and this being African American History Month, we have to. I like to always start off, and we can get back to McDougal or whatever some of your callers may want to talk about. But I always like to, first of all, give all praise and homage to the late great Carter Godwin Woodson, the father of African American History Month, who was born in 1875 and died in 1950, and Dr. Woodson, who established in 1926 Negro History Day, which eventually became Negro History Week, and now it's called Black History Month. So we have to talk about him. And since we're talking about Virginia, too, it's very important that we mention the western part of Virginia, which is West Virginia. One time that was one state. But I want to mention, too, and that's where Dr. Woodson was from New Canton, Virginia. But today, the sister, I want to give all praise and respect to Catherine Coleman Johnson, who was the African-American woman whose calculations of orbital mechanics as an employee of NASA were very critical to the success of the first and subsequent United States crewed spaceships with people like Alan Shepard and John Glenn. This woman actually calculated the orbital trajectory of the spacecrafts leaving Florida and going into the moon. She passed today on February 24th, wow. Captain John, and she was of course one of the key hidden figures in the movie Hidden Figures. She was one of those figures, and she's from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. She passed today, so I want to give her some praise for what she done. She was a mathematical genius, and to those who have seen, Mark, and I'm sure you have too, seen the movie Hidden Figures, it's very interesting how they got her to do the work, and they all the work was done by her, an African American, and she because she too from a very early age she showed strong mathematical abilities. When she was in Greenbrier County, and then for just regular working class people, and she eventually went to West Virginia State University, which was a historically black college, and she actually finished high school at age 14. So she was a mathematical. Oh yeah, she's a mathematical genius, and see, to have her as a mathematical genius is really no big deal, because this being Black History Month, because when you study the history and heritage of African people, you will find that we are the originators of mathematics. As a good friend of mine, Dr. Lonnie Shabazz, who is a member of the Nation of Islam, used to say many years ago, who's the author of a book called Mathematics at the Dawn, he talks about the fact that we were the originators of mathematics. We were the originators of algebra. We were the originators of calculus. We were the originators of physics. We were the originators of science and trigonometry. It came from us. So actually, clocked into the genes of Catherine Coleman Johnson were the genetic DNA of her ancestors down by the base of Mount Kilimanjaro 3.5 to 4 million years ago. So those genes just extend on out even to our young people today. You see, and they just passed through her. So it's really nothing new when you look at it. But I did want to give a shout-out to her. And also, by the way, to a lot of people who may not know, but in this town right now, Durham, North Carolina, tonight, they tell me it was not sold because they didn't charge for the tickets. But it's a packed house. Mae Jemison is speaking over at Duke University, I believe, right now tonight. Wow. Of course, you know who Mae Jemison was.
Yes.
Right. She's in Durham tonight.
Wow.
So there's no need of your listening. No need of your listeners jumping up to go over to Duke right now. They may as well stay here with me on your radio program because it's packed over there. They can't get in, so y'all just sit tight. And I just want to let you know you can read about. Read about it on the internet in the morning or talk to some people. But Mae Jameson is in town tonight, and of course you remember she dropped that cowrie shell when she went up into outer space, so she has some consciousness also.
Definitely. And speaking of consciousness, for those, we got some listeners that are tuning in with you and everything, and I'm going to see if any of them have any questions for you. But that being said, tell folks that are listening, like my friend Dean, that doesn't know your history, a little bit about the No Bookstore, but also about your book, because a lot of people many people are familiar with your book, but there are a lot of folks that don't remember the book that you published some time back that gave a lot of knowledge, and you weren't afraid to ruffle some feathers with your book as well.
No. I've never been afraid to ruffle some feathers, Mark, because what do we put on the earth for? If you put on earth and can't give something back to the people who you are around, people who are in your sphere and influence people, then what good is it for you to be here? Some people, Stokely Carmichael used to say many years ago in classes that I used to sit in with him sometimes when he would come to Durham with Howard Fuller at the Malcolm X Liberation University. He would say, well, what contributions have human beings made? When they read your obituary, what are they going to put on your obituary? Are they only going to say that you were born in such and such a place, died in such and such a place, worked in such and such a place, married to so-and-so and so, and had so-and-so children? Is that all they're going to say about you? And the most important thing, as Stokely used to say, is not the year you were born and the year you died, but in between those years, they have a dash. What is the dash? That dash, what happened between the time you were born and the time that you laid your head down and went back to this creation? What happened there? That's the important point. So we have to become fearless today and begin to speak out for truth and to speak out for justice. You just have to do that. Now, sometimes people, money gets involved, and people can't say this because they might lose this lose this contract from Nike, or might lose this endorsement from some other company or some other corporation in the world. And that's what happens to people, you see, and they get quiet. Or you might look on television and you see people, and they're always talking about Motown. You would think that the only record industry in America has been Motown, but that's not true. But Motown just bought into the system, and Motown is safe, and they can talk about Motown. But when you allow the system in which we live to define what you believe and what you think, then you'll really be at a tremendous disadvantage. So we have to speak out, and I did, and I think you asked me a question about my book and also about the store. Well, first of all, the No Bookstore, and I'm glad you asked me this, Mark, too, because the history has not, and I know I read the on your podcast web where you talked about how you're going to introduce me, and you also read it tonight. Right. And the truth has not really been told yet. Durham, like most communities, as a good friend of mine, from what I understand, I was not there. You may have been there. Fahim Knight spoke at Miss Barnes' funeral. My good friend Lou Suit Barnes, mother of Preston Barnes, your neighbors over in your community. Miss Barnes passed, and her funeral was at White Rock Baptist Church not too long ago. And Fahim said he gave a little history on blacks in Durham and blacks going to White Rock Baptist Church. And I want to tie that into something he said, and that is, oftentimes, if you're not from a certain upper-class elite segment of the Durham community, people want to overlook you. Now, some people don't like to hear it and don't want to accept the truth, but that is an absolute fact. If your name is not Spalding, if your name is not Wheeler, if your name is not Stewart, if your name is not Clements, I'm just using this for example, not casting any aspersion on anybody, but these are the names, as you know, because you're from Durham. If you're not, from that segment, people don't want to give you the credit that you deserve. Now, people can say what they want to say, Mark, but you do know, and you told the truth about it. I brought into this city, I had Michael Eric Dyson at my store, Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakanan. I was responsible for bringing Minister Louis Farrakhan to the campus of North Carolina Central University. I also brought Dr. Lonnie Shabazz, the mathematician I just mentioned, who if people want to look him up online, they can. He was one of the top African-American mathematicians, or one of the top mathematicians, period, not African-American, period, in this country, and he was funeralized about 4 years ago. Brought him to Durham, North Carolina. He was on the Bart Rittner White talk show on WPTF, had a talk show called the Bart Rittner Show that came on every day from about 1 to 4. I had Dr. Lonnie Shabazz, who was a poor black kid from Bessemer, Alabama, who went to Cornell University, received a